In this lesson we look at rotational symmetry. Now a shape has rotational symmetry if it can be spun about a point such that it repeats its shape more than once in a full revolution. Now if it repeats itself after a half turn, which is 180 degrees, then we also say that it has point symmetry. Let's look at some examples. This first shape here is a triangle, but it's a special type of triangle. Like it's known as an equilateral triangle. Now we're asked, does the following shape have rotational symmetry? And if it does, if so, does it have point symmetry also? Well, let's consider firstly rotational symmetry, and then we'll consider point symmetry after that. Now the point that is actually in the center of this equilateral triangle is marked on the diagram. And let's consider the point up here. We're going to spin it around the red point, but that green point at the top just gives us a reference point for the triangle. So if we start spinning it 30 degrees, that's another 30 degrees, so 60. Another 30 is 90. And then another 30 is 120 degrees. And it has repeated itself. So we can see that it repeats its shape. So rotational symmetry, yes it does. Now we're checking whether it's got point symmetry. So we continue its spin, that was another 30, so 150, then another 30 would be 180 degrees. So at this point, does it repeat itself after a half turn? Well, it doesn't, does it? It does not, because it's not on itself what it started as. So when we talk about point symmetry, we have to say no, this shape does not have point symmetry. Our second shape we're considering is a kite. So rotational symmetry and point symmetry, we need to check both. So there's our center of the kite there. Now again, we're going to start off with a point on top of the shape. Let's start spinning that. We'll spin it every 45 degrees this time. So there's a 45 degree spin. Spinning another 45 is 90. Another 45, we're at 135. Then another 45, we're at 180. So we've already done a half turn and it's not repeating itself. So keep on going. That's 225. That's 270 degrees. That's 315. And finally, we've done the full spin back to 360. So rotational symmetry, the answer is no, because it didn't repeat itself more than once in that full revolution. And point symmetry, certainly not. So if it hasn't got rotational symmetry, then it certainly will not have point symmetry either. Our third shape. Right, what would you call this shape? It looks a little bit like a propeller, doesn't it? So rotational symmetry and point symmetry we're checking for. There's our center of the shape. And we'll pick a point up the top there. Let's start spinning it. 45 degree spin. Another 45 is 90. Another 45, 135. Another 45 is 180, and we're on top of what we started with. So rotational symmetry certainly does, yes. And point symmetry, well, if it repeats itself after a half turn, the 180 degrees, then it does have point symmetry. So in this case, this shape does have point symmetry. So we'll put a big yes there. Excellent. Well, that concludes the lesson. So remembering rotational symmetry, if it can be spun about a point such that it repeats its shape more than once in a full revolution, and if it repeats itself after a half turn, 180 degrees, then it has point symmetry.